what you have to say.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much. It's such a privilege and an honor to be asked to speak with all of you guys today. And I suspect that maybe we have many colleagues who may not think about how important and critical it is for preservation education professionals to reach out to military personnel and to consider them as a very, very important audience for preservation education. As I've had the great fortune to work with the 10th Mountain Division, I've been able to learn from their deployment experience. And so these ladies and gentlemen have brought home extremely important lessons learned, which has also taught me how the role that an understanding of cultural property can play in terms of saving soldiers' lives, saving civilian lives, and mission success. And so quite often when I'm working with military personnel, I begin with this slide. And I am not messing around. I genuinely believe that an ability to read the cross-cultural landscape can save soldiers' lives. And so these two examples, one is a pointed rock, which is found in the Bamiyan Valley. It's the tooth of the dragon slain by Hazrat Ali to make the Bamiyan Valley safe for the Hazara people. It's not labeled because all of the Hazara people, and I can guarantee this because I've met some that when I show this picture immediately know what it is. So they don't need a sign for it, but our soldiers would only possibly see this as just an interesting pointed rock. And imagine the exacerbation of conflict if our soldiers were to damage or destroy this critical feature in the landscape by mistake. Another example is the ancient water system of Afghanistan. These lines of round holes represent underground canals. And the Taliban used these water systems to surprise NATO and US personnel over and over and over again. And we, even at the end of the conflict, I've still worked with folks that did not recognize the danger that working in the immediate vicinity of a water system might cause, not to mention the complications when we drill a well adjacent to one of these and disrupt the entire traditional system. Another lesson, and this is where I really learned about our adversaries using cultural property for strategic and tactical advantage. And I showed this picture.
Strategical and tactical.
I showed this picture to a group of soldiers, and they had already deployed and come home from Iraq. And I said, even if a cemetery looks abandoned, we still need to be respectful. And the soldier raised his hand and said, ma'am, that is not an abandoned cemetery. That's a shot up cemetery. And another soldier said, so when they're shooting at us from the cemeteries, is it okay to shoot back? And I was so surprised by the question that I gave an emphatic yes. And another soldier said, ma'am, you're our kind of archaeologist. So in my experience, also having the opportunity to teach soldiers on site, it just doesn't get better than that. This is a group of US military personnel participating in the Bright Star War Games in Egypt. And here we are as guests of Zahir Was at Saqqara. And our experience there was that it was so easy. The site did all the teaching for us. And the response from the personnel was, okay, we get it, Dr. Resch. Now you give us the tools so that we can identify cultural property and respond appropriately. And this is where the no strike or non-lethal target lists can come in and be very effective, along with adding cultural property information to military mapping products. So what are our opportunities for teaching? We can try to reach out to the whole force and generate more awareness. We have introductory and professional military education. One of my personal favorites is field training, where we actually train as we fight and give the soldiers an opportunity to engage with cultural property challenges as they're practicing. And the other is to have support from senior leaders like you saw in Melissa's presentation and Lieutenant General Peterson. Some of the resources that we've drawn upon to help with our education programs include our archaeology awareness playing cards for military personnel. Those have been extremely popular. And I have even met a second generation of card recipients. I met a young soldier last month in Germany who got his first deck of cards from his deployed father, who got his deck in Afghanistan. And this young soldier could not be more enthusiastic about the whole topic of preservation and foreign landscapes. The UN and Smithsonian have made local guides to heritage, like this cover I've showed you, the Guide to Mosul Heritage. They're multilingual guides with lots and lots of pictures and have been distributed widely to forces in Iraq, and also in Mali. And we are currently working to better establish cultural property protection policy doctrine and best practices in the NATO alliance. And we do have a handbook we provide to those personnel as well. Introductory military education, of course, is our chance to reach young soldiers and cadets. We have an active cadet internship program at Fort Drum where we give military officers in training the opportunity to job shadow, to immerse themselves in a cultural resources program for a month at a time. This internship was started actually with the encouragement of Lieutenant General Peterson. And also my hope, I call this subversive institutionalization. I'm hoping that someday some of these really brilliant cadets will be our future senior leaders and will continue to build these programs. We also, professional military education includes sending military personnel for advanced degrees to institutions all over the world. We also are having great success with the alliances and our European partners. These are group photos. The bottom is from a NATO tabletop exercise held in Austria. And the upper photo is our working group as we were in Sarajevo having an advanced research workshop to help us prepare our NATO documents. And of course, there's nothing like the opportunity to experience the heartbreak in a former conflict zone like Sarajevo. And the gentleman in the very middle, Lieutenant Colonel Hazim Hajic, has provided very moving lectures as he watched his National Library burn in Sarajevo. Melissa introduced Dr. Anna Kaiser, one of my personal heroes. Not only does she have a PhD in Roman archaeology, but she's also a military officer in the Austrian army. She also directs this cultural property program masters, and I'm including her slide because it gives you an idea of the wide range of information that's really critical when we're doing a very, very thorough kind of preparation for military personnel. And we also can teach from success. And we had a wonderful conference at the American Academy in Rome. It was co-organized with Professor Brian Rose of the University of Pennsylvania. We had delegates from all over the world, and we had our colleague, Professor Walda from Libya, talk about the aerial operations in Libya and how NATO spared Libyan antiquities. We had Frances D'Amelio, an Associated Press reporter in the audience, and her news story on sparing Libyan antiquities went global. And it was the first time that US Defense Intelligence Agency had a good news story go worldwide. And the response from our colleagues at DIA was wonderful. I actually had an analyst approach me and say, Dr. Rush, we had no idea people really cared about this stuff. And as a result, they became much more engaged and proactive in terms of adding cultural property lists to the databases that inform targeting. So teaching from success can be powerful indeed. I also have another example of success. We have the fortification here is one where Gaddafi had used the cultural property for tactical advantage by putting a radar installation on top of it. And NATO spared the Roman structure and took out the radar. And on the other side, the aerial photo is a community in the nether reaches of Afghanistan. Our 10th Mountain Soldiers noticed that this courtyard wall was painted blue. So when they bedded down in the village, they approached the elders and they said, you know what, this blue wall is telling us that whatever inside is really, really important. If you need us to protect it, we will, but we also promise you we will not enter or damage it. And as a result, within the district controlled by these elders, they were not attacked even once. And it turned out that it was a very, very sacred shrine and pomegranate grove inside. So I mentioned how much I really enjoy teaching in the field. And so I have two examples here. One is our entire archaeology team dressed up as concerned Indigenous community members. And we're working with then Colonel, now General Scott Nauman, to show him our map, which is our actual archaeological protected map of Fort Drum. And we're giving the Colonel and his soldiers the opportunity to practice hosting concerned community members and to partner to find resolutions to spare the cultural property during the course of the conflict. I'm also here with Colonel Kenneth Clark, our formerly our 3rd Brigade commander. And this one, we took not only out into the field for discussions. I was the Minister of Culture of the concerned country, but then he spread the word through the force, and we were able to challenge his soldiers in the field by offering role players who were bringing rescued artifacts to the Americans for safekeeping. So we've also, as Melissa introduced, have been engaging with the whole challenge of the fact that many of us are responsible for managing cultural property on military land. This is not necessarily military land. We are now the stewards of really, really important Indigenous ancestral lands. And that means that we need to be able to, again, read the cross-cultural landscape, recognize not just traditional archaeological sites, but also ancient places of worship, sacred sites, traditional cultural properties. And to do that, we absolutely have to partner with our Indigenous nations. So, and here's additional examples of the kinds of cultural property we find at Fort Drum. Our teams have identified over 200 occupation kinds of sites ranging from fishing stations to ceremonial places like these cobblestone mounds. And then we also have scatters of tools and even Haudenosaunee village sites. So in order to, but we also need to balance with the need for our 10th Mountain Soldiers to be prepared. And so we partner and we encourage visiting and the chance to learn from each other at every opportunity. Fort Drum's 3 nation partners are the Oneida Indian Nation, the Onondaga Nation, and the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe. And we do site visits where we also ask our Indigenous partners to help us understand the importance of these ancestral places. So if we go clockwise from 10 o'clock, we have Major General Donahoe meeting with Faith Keeper Gagne during a head of state visit. In the center, we have Faith Keeper Gagne explaining the importance of the mounds to a former colleague and to me. In the upper right, we have Tadadaho, and you'll also see him below, explaining a site to Colonel John Ramey. And then bottom left, we have Major General Oates presenting an Onondaga delegation with a package of educational materials for Onondaga children. When we host our nation leadership, Department of Defense policy makes it very clear. And in fact, this policy was created in consultation. So our defense leaders actually went out to the nations and said, help us establish what you want our relationships with you to be like. And out of the gate, the nations explained that we are sovereign nations and you need to respect us as sovereign nations. And as a result, when our nation partners come to Fort Drum with their heads of state, they receive head of state protocol. So you can see we have the Haudenosaunee flag flying side by side with our American flag. We have formal gift presentations. So here we have General Donahoe presenting a commemorative snowshoe to a member of the St. Regis Nation Council. We have another one where he's presenting to Clan Mother Wendy Gagne of Onondaga Nation. If you recall, Melissa mentioned too that we need to be respecting their nation leadership according to their culture, government, and social organizations. So when Haudenosaunee leaders come to Fort Drum, the clan mothers are always treated appropriately because they are the heads of state. We have also Clan Mother Webster receiving gifts from Major General Hagenbeck. And below we have a group photo with Lieutenant General Pyatt on the right, Nation Representative Halberter from Oneida Indian Nation, our Garrison Commander, Colonel Harrison, and Nation historian Ron Patterson. And Ron has also been really generous with teaching our ROTC cadets. When they come from the internship, we also try to make sure that they have a chance to do nation visits. And here's a group photo from a typical head of state visit with General Donahoe and Clan Mother Gagne. And again, you see the flags flying appropriately. Also, Mrs. Pyatt, the general, Major General Pyatt was in Baghdad, so his spouse on the far right then stood in as also representing the division. You see Faith Keeper Gagne and Wendy's son, Steve. So, and other clan mothers and representatives of Onondaga. It's very challenging to set up these visits appropriately because, again, our cultures are different. The general's office wants to send out an invitation for Tuesday the 11th at noon, but as it turned out, that Tuesday was planting ceremony, and these clan mothers missed important ceremonies at Onondaga to honor the invitation. And I can brief and I can do my version of preservation education with the general's office, and sometimes I have better luck than others. We also have ancestors who lost their home in Fort Drum that are not Indigenous, but rather European settlers. And in 1940, Fort Drum expanded, and it took the homes of over 360 farms and 200 village families. 5 entire northern New York villages were wiped out during this expansion. And so now we have ancestral places that were originally towns, villages, and farms. And so we now offer those as an opportunity, again, for soldiers to practice respecting the ancestral places of others. So the 3 images on your left is one is what the general store looked like in historic Sterlingville. Below it is what the ruins of the foundation of that store looked like when I first came to work at Fort Drum. And then we reopened historic Sterlingville for training. And so you can see a military vehicle parked on top of the foundation, which is buried underneath a substantial amount of filter fabrics and fill. And we were able to do this because the descendants, and actually some of the actual people who lost their homes there as children came to us and said, we did not give up our homes for archaeology. We gave up our homes to train soldiers. And so that stakeholder participation enabled us to come up with what we're very proud of as a operative solution. We also have built, in some cases, fake archaeology for our soldiers to practice on. I want to raise now a couple of related issues that bring us into the future. Sometimes with academic audiences, sometimes we just don't have that realization that bringing cultural property can also add increased risk to our actual soldiers on the ground. And so in the case of this mosque in Timbuktu, our adversaries again used it to advantage, and they put their headquarters right across the street in one of those tiny buildings. And then they, and so in order to neutralize them, that headquarters needed to be attacked. we had two choices. One could be from the air, the other could be actually the French UN force, or the other could be artillery. Artillery would be more dangerous for the soldiers, yet that is the solution that was selected to make sure there would be absolutely no danger to the mosque from that kind of attack. We also, we've been mentioning the conflict in Ukraine and the behavior of the Russians. Here's an example where the Georgians in Meshketa World Heritage Site were very concerned because these ancient monasteries that date to the 4th century are right along what would be the Russian invasion route should the Russians decide to invade Georgia with an emphasis on taking the capital city of Tbilisi. So in this case, the Georgians have chosen to add this red sign around the blue shield to put the monasteries under special protection, with the hope that should the Russians come in this vicinity and also be a threat, that there would be greater world engagement and response. We also have situations where people use the memories and create monuments. And in this particular case here in Belgrade, this kind of monument may be contributing to modern tension. This is the preserved remains of the bombed out radio building where NATO bombed Belgrade during the Balkan conflict. The Serbians have also made a similar memorial out of their defense headquarters. You'll notice that NATO again targeted military targets, not civilian targets, but it's still the bombings in Belgrade are a very painful memory, and that population has chosen to preserve those memories. And as we think about these issues, I also want to point out that sacred places often have very ancient and sacred origins. In this case, all three of these locations begin with magical healing earth. And then the religious edifices are built on top later on. And so we can also have sacred places even in a situation like Elijah Monastery, which was completely eradicated, bulldozed, all the rubble removed by ISIS. But I would wager that we should still be respectful, because my hypothesis is that that place, if nothing else, is maybe even more sacred than before. And I also am hoping that as cultural property protection evolves in the US military, that we begin to combine the locations of sacred places with an understanding of their ceremonial calendar. And in this case, in the stone churches of Aksum, which again is a UNESCO World Heritage location, nobody was paying attention, even though it was a very, very tense and hostile situation during the pilgrimage for the ceremonies of Our Lady Mary, when Ethiopian Orthodox pilgrims come from all over Ethiopia to worship. And that pilgrimage was selected by the adversaries as a time when these people would be vulnerable to attack, and a horrific genocide took place. So what I would like is for folks and colleagues and military colleagues alike to think about how we can predict some of these activities and perhaps prevent those kinds of horrific and tragic events in the future. And with that, I conclude.
Well, thank you, Laurie. Another fascinating presentation. And at this time, I would open it up for anybody to ask questions or make comments. And I would encourage you to do that. I'll try and catch your hands. Otherwise, just go ahead and speak if there's no one else speaking. I'm really excited that the conference that Melissa was presenting on is going to become an upcoming per journal so that we can learn more about that. And Laurie, I loved the the permission to shoot back if you're being shot at from a cemetery. So I'm sure you won a lot of cred right there when you said that. So
Well,
and
that,
Michael,
oh,
go ahead, Laurie.
I was going to say that experience, I think if you were to ask me about a seminal moment in my career, it was that moment, because I had gone in as the well-intentioned preservationist saying, oh, ladies and gentlemen, let's just all be careful out there, you know, and don't put your artillery on top of that Mesopotamian mound. And when they explained to me what the adversaries were doing in terms of using cultural property, I remember coming back to the office. I was just gobsmacked, really, and thought, oh my goodness, this is so much more important than I ever imagined in a million years. And that's really what launched all of our international efforts in the playing cards. And so much of my effort has really been driven by the soldiers and their experiences, and then their willingness to share and contribute examples and ideas that's enabled me to really think in a much more military kind of way about these issues. I've been so fortunate to work with some pretty extraordinary military personnel.
It's fascinating. Yeah.
I'm reminded of my friend T in Cambodia, who revealed to me he is a guide that I've hired to train other guides in Cambodia. He revealed to me that he was manning an artillery battery in Angkor Wat, shooting at the bombers. The US military, of course, were doing flyovers. And of course, I was the one in the darn bomber. We've been, you know, it's rather remarkable how life teaches you lessons like that, as you say, Laurie. You're muted, Sue-Ann.
It's because I'm having coughing fits. But the images that you presented, just, it's always astounding that those, you know, were in print and continue in that regard. Quite shocking in many ways, but I guess we need to be shocked sometimes too. So.
Well, the purpose of the cartoons or the lampooning, the satire, particularly visual, accelerates considerably in the 19th century with the duplicationist Syrian popular journalism that accelerates. That's a comment born of other research. The number of newspapers accelerates and reaches a peak in 1893-94 by virtue of the advertising that was being done. And it's not just a US phenomenon, but a phenomenon worldwide. After that, the decrease in the number of periodicals, journals, is noticeable. So when you're looking for graphic material at any given time, you're always aware of the nature of the publication and where it is being supported and how it is. Its political point of view is cast by virtue of the backers of the newspaper, the advertisers, and the political point of view. So it's not by any means a universally applicable thing in all countries. But on the other side of the question is a pretty good record of the attitudes of Europe and the United States and many other parts of the capitalist world.
Anybody else have any observations? One came in, a discussion comment that we need more discussion of these issues in the media. What a great documentary subject.
Hmm.
And I couldn't agree more. If anybody thinks of who might be charged with taking this on, I think it is something that we do need more publicity about, more discussion about.
And I can also tell you from personal experience that the Department of Defense pays a lot of attention to the media. And good media, well, as I gave my example of the Defense Intelligence Agency and their response to the good news story for Libya. But when the playing cards got a lot of media attention, that also really created a lot of resonance, and at the high levels of the Pentagon gave me opportunities to brief. And it also gave me opportunities to represent the US in the Middle East at a whole wide range of military exercises like Bright Star. It also helped a lot of us within the Department of Defense who cared about these issues to find each other. So someone, a colleague at Edwards Air Force Base, called up because he heard about the playing cards, and then we were able to work on how you train pilots to avoid a target as opposed to hit a target. So many good things can happen with the right kind of media coverage. And in my experience, military personnel have been really responsive to both good and bad media.
Might be useful to create a committee. We could create a committee to examine that issue of making sure that there's more press, so to speak, more consideration, because really it takes the time and effort to the individuals who are knowledgeable to make a difference.
Yeah, and it's the other challenge too is that because military assignments change every 2 to 3 years, you know, all those people that I briefed in 2007 to 2010, they aren't in the military anymore. And you have to keep nurturing those leaders as they're rising. It's a big challenge.
It may be that some of those people, though, are the best people in which to comment or to contribute, right? If we reach out to them with this idea, I mean, the alumni that have become involved in the military, the people that have this kind of experience and have been involved, are basically the best advocates for what it is that we could want to advance.
That's a really good point. That's an excellent point.
It may be that we establish a committee of the National Council, and by virtue of that, tag somebody to do the coordination of the communication, and basically then invite people to share their thoughts. I
can round up the old gang.
Well, of course, but that's an old gang. I mean, there are a lot of people who could theoretically contribute if they'd be willing to spend the time.
That's a great idea.
So if nothing else happens with this particular gathering today, we've hatched another scheme.
Yes, indeed.
It'd be interesting to follow up with those whom you trained and see if they pass that training on.
Yes,
did it die with them?
The story of those playing cards being passed on to the son, or the next person, so to speak. I mean, that's a delightful story.
Yep. It made the 8-hour drive on the Autobahn worth it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
If I can jump in, this is Manish, everybody. Hello. Sorry.
I'm glad you finally made it, Manish.
Yeah, finally made it. We were in a different room and there was some technology glitch. But so I just had a general thought. This is all very interesting. Never sort of thought about it in any great detail, but it'd be great to came up in the discussions to bring back people who have been trained in this by folks in this room or outside of this room, and have a focus group to understand, their challenges on site, and how they have used their knowledge during active combat, and the degree to which this, where some of the gaps might be in our training and some of the strengths might be. And Laurie, you might already have the answer to that. So I'm sharing my thought that this came to me after hearing you speak.
No, I really ended up, because quite often after we send those soldiers forward, we don't see them again. So it's kind of difficult, but I think it's an excellent idea. And I think we would I think we'd have situations where they're like, yeah, that didn't help at all. But I think we might also have some really rewarding accounts too, if we were able to find and track down some of these people.
Right. And I'm thinking if we were to be distilling, best practices and other such sort of document to develop this excellent work that you're doing. So getting somehow reaching out to these soldiers and getting a group back together through NCPE, we could do that, and having a focus group of sorts and gathering information would be quite beneficial, I think. Thank you for the wonderful talk.
Oh, thank you.
Manish, I'll only comment that I have interviewed the units of the Indian Army who have been detailed to the Middle East in various cases. And I've often thought about Laurie's work in the NATO involvements and the comparisons that she's done with other military. Because when you look at the future of most of the countries in the world, India plays a rather remarkable route or a part in the sorts of conflicts and the attitudes associated. And as you know, that's a very complex equation in what is a nation dedicated to basically non-allied thinking.
Absolutely, because I was also thinking that a training such as this in the wrong hands would give them even more fodder and information to sort of target these sites that are sacred and important as, symbols of destruction. So I was struggling with that, but I don't know. I'm glad to hear that you spoke with the Indian Army. I didn't even think they were thinking this strategically. So.
You're muted again.
There I am again, muted. Are there other questions or comments?
May I jump in? Sorry.
Please do.
I don't have a comment or question regarding the presentation, but I think this is a very important issue that we probably need to talk about it in a broader range. I mean, social media was one of them, of course, but I think maybe like more like broader and bigger conferences and like a session in a national conferences or international conferences would be very a good idea for continuing this conversation in a broader range. I mean, I think I have many students coming from Middle East, India, and like I think it's important for them to understand the problem. I mean, they may know the problem, but they don't see it in this way. So it's very important for them to be engaged, I think.
Yeah, I think it definitely needs to have a bigger, broader audience in discussion. And as a preservation architect and professor, I'm, focused on wood rot and things like that and stone deterioration, but this is a whole bigger picture. And our students need to be aware of that. I know I see Angela Lombardi is on the call, and she's been in Italy, and she's from Italy, so she looks at things in a bigger picture as well. But I think from a global standpoint, this is a subject that needs a lot of attention and training. I mean, just some awareness and education. I know I need more.
Should we propose, Sue-Ann, and Mayar particularly, we could propose for the upcoming APT meeting in Seattle, if it's the case that the NCPE meeting, annual meeting, is going to be connected to the APT meeting in Seattle next fall. Perhaps it's appropriate to do something along those lines of in broadening the tent. We can certainly, suggest a session in APT, but the other side of the question is we could do jointly something but with APT, or embedded alongside it, to increase the number of people who become aware. For those who are not aware of the Association for Preservation Technology International, it's trying to do international work, right? It has international chapters, right? But this is the largest professional preservation organization in preservation in technology that you have on the planet. So in a sense, while, Sue-Ann is saying wood rot, well, the wood rot is everywhere. The reality is that the archaeology community deals with wood rot too, right? So it fits in many respects, but we might want to think about that as part of our agenda going forward.
I see this as just scratching a surface that we really need to delve into much more deeply. And I appreciate everybody for checking in if they could, and we'll definitely put this on the